Being heartsick in a never-ending cycle is the worst form of torture, and I nearly died because of it. There's literally a system inside of your brain that punishes you every time you try to get better, making it impossible to improve your life. We will go deep in this video, discussing the issue at the most fundamental level, building our understanding from the ground up in simple terms, giving you the interactive tools you need to visualize your progress, and finally, applying the knowledge by using actionable, concrete steps to see real-world results. This is not your typical dopamine detox meditation Andrew Huberman garbage. This is a fucking masterclass, and by the end of it, you will be completely and utterly equipped with the systemic knowledge you need to absolutely shatter these never-ending bitches once and for all. Let's begin. Part 1. Harvard's most brutal experiment. In the 1950s, a Harvard scientist wanted to see how long a rat would swim for before accepting its fate and sinking to the bottom. On average, the rats lasted about 15 minutes or so before drowning. He then took another group of rats, and this time, right at the 15 minutes mark, just before they were about to give up, he pulled the rat out, dried it off, and then put it back into the water for round 2. He repeated this several times to condition the rat, and he wanted to find out if he could increase how long they would keep swimming for before giving up. If you asked people to guess how long the second rat swam for, they'd say, okay, maybe twice as long as the first one, maybe 3 times as long, maybe 4 times, 5 times as long, you know? They might guess that the rat went from 15 minutes to an hour, which is an amazing improvement when you think about it. But the rat did not swim for an hour. They didn't swim for 60 minutes. They swam for 60 hours. Can you imagine the level of torture and pain that poor little rat had to go through? This is what happens when you give someone just a little bit of hope and then take it away a moment later. It creates infinite amount of pain. And the crazy part is that we are not any different from this rat, you know? You just replace the evil scientist with your own brain, and you're basically in the exact same situation. For a few weeks, you're disciplined, you get shit done even if you don't want to do it. This naturally makes you confident and hopeful about the future, because if you continue like this, it's just a matter of time before you achieve your goals and get compounding results. The nuance is that if you actually continue like this, you scroll for not even 20 minutes. It's not a big of a deal. And before you know it, a week went by, and now you look like this, in a downward spiral, full of shame, nihilistic, and hate your fucking life. Suddenly, the same guy who was ruthless a week ago can barely get himself out of bed to do the basics. What? You stay like that until the shame becomes unbearable, pushing you up. You swear to God this is your last time falling off. The fire comes back. You get your shit together just to repeat the cycle over and over and over and over and over and over again. It's insanity. Nothing is more demoralizing than this, yet no one explains how to solve it. When I faced this problem the first time, I went on YouTube like everyone else, you know, to see if I can find anything helpful. But what all these motherfuckers are saying is dopamine baseline, update your identity. What the fuck does that even mean, bro? What are you saying? Tell me what to do, motherfucker. And that's why I'm making this video. The only reason I made this video is because someone else asked me in the comments to do it. So please go ahead and tell me what kind of problems you're facing. Tell me in the comments, and I will literally do my best to search the entire fucking web and find you the actual solution, right? And I had no choice but to figure this bullshit out by myself. And it nearly cost me my life. Part 2. My near-death experience. Here's how I discovered this pattern in my life, and I bet after hearing my story, your jaw would literally drop thinking, holy fuck, this is exactly the situation I'm living right now. It's almost scary how predictable this is. But if you're not interested in the backstory, then no pressure at all. Feel free to skip to the next section where we get more technical and practical on how these cycles work, okay? In my teenage years, I was the typical kid whose brain got destroyed by these evil companies. There was no concrete goals at all. I was fully driven by impulse, staying up until 5 a.m, doing all the bullshit habits like playing games, scrolling, fapping, and all that shit, you know. If other kids had bright futures, mine was pitch black. Up until I discovered self-improvement when my best friend sent me a video of Hamza. The message hit me so hard when I started, It was mainly the idea of discipline that clicked with me, doing the hard work, especially when you don't feel like it. It felt like someone had finally put words to the frustration that I had been carrying for years. Progress is actually possible now. Making money is a skill, and if I get better at making money, I make more money? Why play video games when you can play the game of life, right? So I chose business as the first endeavor to pursue. This will be my first key to freedom and escape from the mediocre life that I hated so much. The first 3 months were euphoric. I literally did everything perfect. Reading, meditation, cold showers, and all that crap, It felt like a montage from a movie, and I thought to myself, this is it. My life will only go up from here. But then reality hit me like a truck, as it does to everybody. A few months later, the first crash came in. I relapsed into my old habits, I binged mindlessly, but this time, the pain and the shame was so much worse because I knew better. I couldn't hide behind ignorance anymore or pretend that I didn't understand the consequences. I knew exactly what I was doing to myself, and that made every mistake feel 10 times worse. Yet despite everything, I was still fucking determined to make this work. Every relapse filled me with so much guilt, and that guilt would slowly build up in the background until it eventually exploded in my face, forcing me back into discipline once again. After getting back on my feet, I would feel unstoppable, convinced that this is the last time and things from now on will be different. But it was only the start of the endless cycle. Intense discipline, followed by a crash, followed by guilt and shame, into restarting over and over again. For years on end, I would build myself up to a certain point, only to watch myself tear it all back down with my own hands. It was a constant cycle of construction and hope, followed by destruction and despair. And the suffering existed on both sides. Winning meant suffering because discipline requires doing things that I didn't want to do. And losing is also fucking suffering because I knew I was wasting my potential and betraying my own standards. And that's not even the worst part. The worst part is that I didn't even get a reward for any of that pain because every drop resets the momentum of the previous win, dragging me back to square one as if nothing happened at all, as if I didn't put any effort whatsoever. And it would have probably, it would have probably been better to not put in the effort because this added an extra unnecessary, unrewarding layer of suffering. And this was not limited to one area of my life. It happened everywhere, all the way from my finances to health to the cleanliness of my room and even the views on my YouTube channel. Up until one day when my life flipped upside down. I was on School, which is a community hosting website similar to Reddit, and there I saw a notification. It was by Andrew Kirby, and he was trying to gather feedback about a new feature they were planning to add to this new platform. So I took the opportunity and jumped on the call with him instantly. And here I was directly speaking with someone who is actually living the results that I wanted. Not a video, an actual conversation. I asked him so many questions and he pointed me towards a program from Sam Ovens. I took the program without any hesitation, and what followed from there felt like putting on glasses after being half blind my entire life. Suddenly, things started to actually make sense. Now I can see the structure behind what's going on with so much clarity. I started learning about advanced concepts such as systems theory, which explains how everything connects and how outcomes are engineered with precision, not wished for. At this point, progress stopped being this weird abstract thing that I'm trying to force, and I began to understand how change actually works on a fundamental level. The more aware I became, the more I realized how predictable these cycles were. I thought to myself, if it's predictable, then it means there is a mechanism at play that explains how it works. Something doesn't just repeat itself over and over again through luck or randomness. If it's repetitive, then there is some underlying cause to it. My original goal when I started was financial freedom and escaping mediocrity, but then I made it my mission to understand systems and how the mind works and why the fuck does this happen, Why would someone build something just to destroy it a moment later? I knew at the time that if I can understand this problem, then success is guaranteed to happen, because if I could just sustain those good days, then it's just a matter of time until I get good results. After going deeper into these concepts, I took action by engineering my first system, V1. And to test if this thing actually worked or not, I decided to measure its effectiveness against how much money I made. So instead of the goal being just make money online, now it became engineer a system capable of generating $2,000 in 1 month. It became clear. A functioning system is now the true goal, and money is just the unit of measurement. By the way, since we're at it, the first video in the description explains how you can engineer your own systems to achieve your own goals, so check it out. So after engineering my first system, I reached the point of no return. I started working like a fucking slave. I used all of these new ideas to push myself to the absolute limits. Here's a list of all the things that had to be done for this goal to become a reality. All of these were being done by one person, and that's me. To put this into perspective, imagine you leash a dog and tie him to a bike so that he can't go anywhere. Then you run at a speed where he can barely catch up. Then you give him 13 balls to juggle, and then he has to do this for 20 hours a day. And if he fails to keep up, he gets electrocuted. Then on top of all that, you keep going for an entire month. Yep, that was exactly what happened to me in January 2025. At one point, I reached 100 hours of gameplay per week. I was doing 8 sales calls per day and sleeping 4 hours on average and drinking 5 cups of dense coffee every single day for a whole month. And in that month, I reached my goal of $2,000. But it was not what I expected at all. At first, I was happy, obviously. I thought that I had figured it out. Looking back now, I didn't figure out shit. I didn't solve the underlying problem. I had simply pushed it aside through sheer grit, which is rarely the answer when trying to make a system do what you want. As one principle of systems theory puts it, the harder you push, the harder the system pushes back. From that point, stress from a whole month of work finally started registering the gap between where I am and where I'm allowed to be. And the cycle began yet again, but this time it was a major, intense burnout. All that pressure suddenly exploded in my face out of nowhere, and I found myself drowning in disassociation disorder, unable to even process reality. The slightest triggers would cause extreme psychological breakdown and panic attacks and heartbeat. Sometimes my muscles would literally tighten up to the point where I can't even move my arms. I nearly hospitalized myself. It was a very humbling and fucking brutal. I knew this before, but now it further reinforced the fact that this path is not a joke, and it most certainly is not easy at all. Being so close yet so far at the same time, without a doubt, is the most humbling, demoralizing experience a person can go through. It becomes more than frustration. This goes beyond sadness or anger. It just turns into numbness, emptiness, and nihilism. It feels like pure hell on earth when your 78th attempt is yet another failure, another comparison between the current you and the version of you that was supposed to exist long ago. After all these years of fucking effort, the pain was unbearable, and I find myself faced with two choices: myself and end this suffering once and for all, or try again. Without a second guess, I chose the first option. I wore my jacket and went to the nearest train station, as I thought it would be the fastest and easiest way to get it done. I look at the time, 6 minutes till the next one arrive. I get a sigh of relief knowing that all this unnecessary suffering is about to end right here, right now. As the train approached, I stepped closer and closer to the edge of the platform, staring down into the abyss with everything inside of me feeling completely spent. And then, out of nowhere, a weird voice started whispering in my mind, telling me that I'd come too far to quit now and that I should get a reward for all this pain, but I cut it off immediately. I did not give a fuck. I was like, no, I don't give a shit. In that moment, it all felt final. This was the lowest point possible, because anything beyond this is just death itself. Like, you can't even exist below this point. So I reasoned that there was nothing left to fight for. Life has taken everything from me. I had already gotten back up 1,000 times and nothing ever changed. So what would make this time any different if I don't give up here? But then the most devilish thought followed. No one actually knows if this time will be different. So maybe there is one way to settle this debate. Just try one last time. And if it still doesn't work, then you can end it, no questions asked. And in that strange silence between persistence and surrender lie the glimmer of dark hope, allowing the train to pass by, centimeters away from my face. And I simply answered, "You have a deal." This was my last stand. Here, my entire biology and psychology knew for a fact that I was not fucking around anymore and that the next failure will end it all. So automatically, the thing that consumed me the most was the science of breaking never-ending cycles. This experience taught me that V1 had a major flaw, which is that grit and discipline are not the full answer. But unlike before, now I knew how to adapt, and I started building V2, focused on long-term behavior instead of short-term wins. I started researching and learning everything I could get my hands on regarding human behavior, all the way from psychology to systems to biology and even philosophy, with the sole purpose of having 6 months of consistent good behaviors without burning out or relying on willpower. Hours turned into days, days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and before I realized it, a full year had passed and I wasn't the same person anymore. I had become someone completely unrecognizable. Once I finished the system and applied it, my execution reached 91% on average. And now, after all these years of suffering, I can proudly say I have full control over my behaviors. I haven't had any major ruts or downfalls in the last year or so. I only missed 3 days of work out of the total 213 last days. It feels surreal. I can't even begin to explain how good life is when it's not the same repetitive cringe cycle. You still face problems here and there, of course, but now at least you don't fucking reset every time you move a step forward. I'm 23 years old, and for the first time ever I can proudly say that I don't feel stuck in a loop. I had actually broken it through the very simple steps that I'm gonna walk you through in this video. As much nuance as this video has, it's just one part of a larger model from systems engineering. If you want to deeply understand this discipline and engineer your own systems that get you your goals, then check out the first video in the description. Like I said earlier, I highly recommend you start there before delving deep into this. Okay, with that said, let's begin. Part 3. A brief introduction to systems theory. How does this make any fucking sense? Why would someone do this to themselves? On one end, you have the total NPCs who are happy being average losers. On the other hand, you have the David Goggins, the Elon Musk who just grind every day and are successful. And then there is the guy who's been at it for years, refusing to quit, but hasn't moved a single inch. Every step forward gets cancelled by a step back. He's not okay with being average, but he can't seem to become exceptional either. So enough talking, let's get very concrete here for a second. What was the system theory bullshit that I found? You are a system. And what does that mean? A system is a collection of processes that converts inputs to produce outputs. This is very important to understand because if you want to improve your life, you are essentially building systems whether you know it or not. In some systems, the output or information about that output goes around and affects the input, creating a cycle also known as a feedback loop. This cycle can be both positive and negative. There are mainly 2 types of feedback loops: balancing feedback loops and reinforcing feedback loops. A reinforcement feedback loop happens when change builds on itself. So more leads to even more, and less usually leads to even less. Examples of this includes population growth, population collapse, compounding investments, or just the spread of a disease in a pandemic. This is where you see those exponential graphs everyone's just talking about. A balancing feedback loops, on the other hand, is the opposite because it pushes back against change to bring the system back to an acceptable range called a set point. This range and the gap between the system state and the desired state is what triggers the balancing feedback loop. So too much will bring the system down and too little will bring it up. Examples of this include a cup of coffee going from either too hot or too cold to room temperature. Another example could be someone's bank account spending. If the account balance gets too low, the person spends less money to bring the money up, and vice versa. If they have too much money, they would be comfortable spending more, bringing the account balance back down. So, if reinforcement loops explains how people grow fast out of nowhere, then balancing loops explain why they fall back and remain stuck in their old habits, and this is the more important loop that you need to study if you ever feel stuck. Don't worry if this sounds a little bit too abstract, because it is. I explain this in much more details and in simple terms in these 3 videos, so check them out. If you've already watched them, however, then feel free to skip to the action exercises of this section if you want to speed it up, okay? So here's what happens when you plot these 2 kinds of feedback loops next to each other. When reinforcing and balancing balancing loops exist in the same system, they take turns controlling your behaviors. The reinforcement loop amplifies your current direction, whilst the balancing loop pushes you back towards your internal set point whenever you drift too far, either up or down. When you start the grind, positive actions create momentum, they create positive results, and here you have confidence by your side, which builds up over time. This is where the reinforcement loop is by your side in the positive direction. But the higher you go, the further away you get from what your system believes is normal, from what your system considers is the set point, and this is where the pressure starts building up in the background. Eventually, the balancing loop activates to correct the deviation from the set point. Here, you miss one workout, you start coping by saying things like, I work too hard, I deserve a rest, one fap will not change it, And then once the decline starts, the reinforcement loop amplifies it. So now, one skipped habit becomes 3. Avoidance creates more avoidance, guilt creates more guilt, and the downward spiral accelerates. Because you want to avoid all that shame, you go into instant gratification activities that put you in a short escape, but it only worsens the situation. This is when the reinforcement loop is operating in the negative direction. Suddenly, the same person who felt unstoppable the last week is now struggling to follow through on basic commitments. It feels like completely two different people, but that's because the feedback loops can go in both directions. Once you fall far enough below your normal range, the balancing loops activate again in the opposite direction. Here, you reach an unbearable level of self-disgust and shame with yourself, which pushes you back into actions yet again. You start small, and then it starts building up. This is where you swear that you're never going back down there again. You clean up your life slowly but surely, and you get your shit together. Here, the reinforcement loop amplifies that small recovery until you overshoot your set point once again. And then the cycle repeats, and the cycle repeats. You've lived this cycle so many times, it almost feels scripted, and that's because it is. From the outside, it looks like I lost motivation, I wasn't disciplined enough, but from a system thinker perspective, what actually happened is the balancing feedback loop did its job perfectly. Your system and your brain is not optimized for growth, it's optimized for survival and stability, and until you re-engineer it, you will keep falling back. And I call this Oscillation's hell. This is the first insight that I want to give you here. It's not a cycle, it's an oscillation. A cycle seems infinite with no way out, because the question then becomes like, if I get out, then where do I exactly go? An oscillation, on the other hand, happens over time. It can be measured, it can be modified and ultimately controlled, because your highs and lows are not random accidents, they are predictable outputs of the reinforcing loop, amplifying the corrections of the balancing loop with a fixed set point. And this doesn't just happen to you, by the way, it's almost a universal pattern seen in complex adaptive systems. Oscillations are everywhere in nature. For example, if you look at the predator-prey populations, we find oscillations described by the Lotka-Volterra equations. The Lotka-Volterra equations are a pair of first-order nonlinear differential equations frequently used to describe the dynamics of biological systems in which two species interact together, one as predator and the other as prey. These equations explain how the two populations influence each other in a repeating cycle. For example, when prey, say rabbits for example, are abundant, predators such as foxes have more food to eat, so their population also grows. As the foxes' number increases, more rabbits are eaten, causing the rabbits' population to decline. With fewer and fewer rabbits available, foxes begin to starve to death and their population also decreases. As the foxes' number falls, the rabbits' population recovers and the cycle repeats again. More rabbits leads to more foxes leads to fewer rabbits leads to fewer foxes, and fewer foxes leads to more rabbits, creating an oscillation. I want you to keep the Lotka-Volterra equations in the back of your mind, as we're gonna come back to it in a little bit. For now, just understand that if you ever feel stuck in an oscillation, just remember this: it's a totally normal pattern that happens everywhere in nature, and you are no exception to it. Now, this theory is all beautiful and all, but it's fucking rubbish if you don't actually apply it to your life. So let's get started here with the first action steps to solving this problem, which is awareness. Step 0. Grab the PDF in the descriptions below that outlines all the exercises, actions you need to complete. You don't need to put in any mail or any bullshit, it's literally a gift from me to you. Step 1. Create a Miro account. Step 2. Go to the Miro board mentioned in the PDF, then find this diagram, copy it and paste it into your own board. Step 3. Define the activity by asking yourself, what is your goal right now? What's the area of life that you're most interested in? What do you want to improve at? Be specific. Step 4. Define the spectrum. In this area of life, what is considered as positive versus negative consequences? Step 5. Identify the positive amplitude. Write down what is your highest point in this specific area of life, which when you reach, you seem to never surpass and you start breaking things back down. What's your highest performance? Describe it in a short paragraph. Step 6. Identify the negative amplitude. What is your low point that when you reach, you seem to never ever break it or go below it? When do you say, fuck this, I'm done, enough is enough? When does that happen? For example, with money, it could be that when you reach $200, you panic and you start saving your money to get back up. Keep in mind that everyone have a different number here, but what's important is that we all have a specific number. It could be 200, it could be minus 200. What is it specifically for you? A low point, remember, is something that you never break, okay? No matter how bad life is, this is like a standard. No matter how shit you feel, no matter how depressed or broken you are, you simply have never been below it. It's a standard, okay? Step 7. Define the period. This is the amount of time it takes for one oscillation to complete, and we're gonna use days to measure it. How long does it take for a cycle to complete? How long does one oscillation last for? You can measure this by looking at your highs and lows and asking yourself, how long do you usually stay in a win? Or how long do you usually stay in a rut, you know? How long does it take until an event repeats itself? Again, expressed in days. For example, my period used to be super long, of like 45 days, you know. Yours could be 4 days, it could be 11 days, but you gotta define yours, you know. So for me, for my example, whenever I will be on the grind, I would always grind more work so that I can compensate for the drop that's about to happen in the next 1 month or whatever. But I wouldn't be able to know that hadn't I asked that question, you know. So I want you to pause this video and actually complete these action items. Don't do it later, don't do it after you finish the video or after you finish the following sections. Do it now. The only way to get it done is to actually go and fucking do it. Don't put it off for later. Don't be a bitch, okay? You wanna know something super fucking interesting? I don't know how many views this video will get, but I want you to look at the number of views and know for a fact that 99% of people who watch this shit are not taking these action steps and will remain in the exact same position, okay? The choice is yours. Don't be like those people. Part 4. Reduce the feedback delay. Now that you recognize the pattern and you can spot it happening, the next step is actually fixing this shit. Because yeah, okay, it's cool and all, but why? Like, why the fuck does this oscillation happen? Why do you have to suffer through this? What's the point of an oscillation? Why can't you just keep going up and up and up without falling off? And no, it's not because if it was easy then everyone would have it and suffering makes it valuable. Fuck that motivational bullshit. That doesn't tell you shit. That doesn't explain how to solve it. I'm gonna tell you why this happens at the fundamental level, and more importantly than the why is how can you actually solve this problem. There are 3 things that needs to take place for an oscillation to occur, and that's a balancing feedback loop, which is the trigger, the reinforcement feedback loop, which is the overshooting, and the delayed feedback, which is the real underlying cause of an oscillation in complex adaptive systems. The reason why all this happens is because of something called feedback delay. Let's start with a very simple example where there is no feedback delay. Imagine a simple shower system where the input is the handle position. This input acts as a signal that controls the water temperature coming out of the shower. The output of the system is the water flowing out of the shower heads, and the stock is the water temperature itself. And remember what feedback is. Feedback occurs when the information about the output is fed back into the system and influences the inputs or the control process. In this example, feedback happens when you feel the water temperature with your hand or your body. That sensory information tells you whether the water is too hot or too cold and if it needs adjustment or not. And then you adjust the handle accordingly. This adjustment changes the input, which in return changes the output, creating a closed feedback loop. So the feedback here is feeling the water. Imagine in the shower, the current state being 18 degrees Celsius, and the desired state that you want to be in is 20 degrees. So you increase the heat slightly, the water instantly warm up, you instantly feel the heat going up, and you stop adjusting because you have reached your desired goal. So now the system reaches a state of equilibrium and stability. This is what balancing loops are supposed to do. You adjust until you reach the desired state, creating stability. But now, look what happens when you increase the feedback delay. But what is feedback delay? It's the amount of time it takes for the feedback to arrive. For our example, let's suppose water takes 10 seconds to arrive instead of it being instantaneous change, because the pipe is now way longer, okay? The feeling of water, which is the feedback, is now delayed by 10 seconds due to travel time. Again, we're going to have the same initial conditions as earlier. So you're still in the shower with the current state being 18 degrees Celsius and the desired state that you want to be in is 20 degrees. So you increase the heat slightly, just like you did before, but this time, because the water doesn't warm up instantly, you still experience 18 degrees despite the change of inputs. Not knowing that there is a delay, you assume that your adjustment didn't work. You might think that the handle is broken or that you didn't change it enough. So you increase the heat even more. Still no change. You increase it even further. At some points, once the 10 seconds elapse, the output of the first input takes place. Then all the other outputs that have been accumulating in the background eventually catch up as well, and now the water gets too hot at 22 degrees Celsius. You've overshot the set point or the desired state, which was 20 degrees, and so you try to adjust it back down. But again, the cooling is also delayed, so it cools too much and you go from 22 degrees to now 17 degrees, overshooting again, creating a cycle. As you can see, the problem feedback creates is a separation between the actual stock level and the perceived stock level, a separation between the actual temperature and the perceived temperature. When you acted on the system, it did in fact change. It's just that you didn't perceive that change and thought that nothing happened. But it was simply delayed, and the solution is a lot simpler than you think. All you had to do here is just wait. If you just waited for 10 seconds, you would have enjoyed your warm shower without any of this headache. But there are also other solutions that exist, since the real world is a lot more complex than a simple shower. To understand why you keep oscillating between obsession and collapse and how to fix it, we need to apply this mental model and look at human behavior as a system. Like I explained in previous video, the self-improvement system looks something like this. The inflow is your actions. The stock is the consequences you experience, which can be positive or negative. The outflow is negative action or failures, and the yield is positive actions or successes. These two obviously makes up the output, which is the future situation you're in. The feedback is your growth rate, which is basically observing the results and measuring whether you've improved or not, and arriving at a conclusion. This is done by the anterior cingulate cortex, or ACC for short. This part of the brain is responsible for detecting discrepancies between the current state and the desired state. When this comparison is done, the ICC generates what's called an error term, which is how far the system is from the set point, or at least how far the ACC thinks the system is far away from the set point. This error is often expressed in emotional intensity, either as irritation and shame when you're down bad, or as pride and content when you're on a roll and winning. Those emotions are regulators to correct the deviation from the set point. The ICC is constantly asking, how far am I from where I'm supposed to be? That supposed to be is what's called the set point, or the desired state that your internal system is trying to achieve. Generally speaking, the natural set point for humans, or the natural set point that the human brain is trying to achieve, is what's called homeostasis, which is staying safe within a stable range, avoiding risk, and surviving. After having the system mapped out, we can now observe how oscillations take place and how each part participates in creating it. On the left side, we have the y-axis measuring someone's stock level, which is the consequences of their actions and just overall life quality, with 0 being the average life, the negative representing bad days, and the positive representing good days. On the x-axis we have the time. Let's assume that the starting point as being an average person. Here, you're fulfilling your natural needs just by doing the bare minimum effort to survive and maintain homeostasis, until one day when you encounter a stimulus, usually online, related to personal development. This is where the grind starts, and like I explained earlier, the reinforcement loop amplifies change and momentum is by your side. Positive actions creating even more positive results, which motivates you and helps you do even more positive actions. However, being disciplined creates a few consequences. The first one is stress and the need for recovery, since discipline is costly. The second is the reward of the hard work itself. And the third is the positive emotions such as pride or content about this achievement. These consequences, however, are delayed. They don't arrive instantly, just like the shower example from earlier. After all, it's called delayed gratification for a reason. After grinding for a while, you start receiving a little bit of stress of the initial days, but you ignore it since everyone is shouting at your face telling you to stop being a bitch, suck it up and get it done. You think to yourself, meh, it's not big of a deal, hard times create strong men, and you keep pushing forward anyway. So far so good, but eventually all the stress from the other days that's been building up in the background, they also start catching up one by one, and here you physically cannot be disciplined anymore. The balancing feedback loop kicks in to correct the deviation from the set point and recover all the resources you've spent on being disciplined. It's exactly here where you think to yourself, okay, maybe I actually do need to rest a little bit. After all, I worked super hard for a long time. And you do that by slowing down a little bit when it comes to taking action. In the manosphere space, everyone just hates and demonizes those kinds of thoughts, when in reality, it's not the problem at all. If you keep going, you'll just die. You're not a machine. You cannot keep going forever. You have to recover whether you like it or not. I wish it wasn't like that, but it's just how the body works. Get over it and learn how to adapt instead. Here's what the real problem is. The real problem comes when the reward of your early hard work and the positive emotions associated with the reward also starts catching up at the same time as slowing down. And I call this the lethargic king phase. The reason I call it that is because in this phase, you're not putting in much effort at all. In fact, it's probably the opposite, where you're starting to reintegrate some of the bad habits, yet at the same time, you're getting rewarded. It's like a lethargic king getting carried by a hard-working laborer. And since the king doesn't experience any immediate negative consequences despite slowing down, he decides to reintegrate more bad habits. Busting a nut after 2 weeks of no-how feels like heaven on earth. Why wouldn't he do it? He's not feeling any pain. In fact, he's experiencing reward, pride, and content. The king had mistaken delayed consequences for no consequences at all. We all know where this is going. The negative consequences are now building up in the background as well. The negative consequences are now building up in the background without your awareness until you start experiencing the slip. And when that happens, it feels like no matter how hard you try to hold on, every attempt just instantly fails. Here you panic, you start trying to hold to dear life, even if you don't want to do it. Come on mate. But this time, for some reason, discipline doesn't work. Have you ever wondered why does the slip feels unavoidable despite the fact that you consciously know it's wrong? Not only that, but you've already proven to yourself that you can conquer your emotion with sheer will when you were locked in during the grind. But the slip feels more like an inevitable force of nature than an emotion, doesn't it? Why is that? That's because the cause of the slip is already set in motion in the past when you've taken the negative action, and now you're experiencing the delayed consequences of an irreversible damage that you've done to yourself. And I say irreversible because you can't travel backward in time to cancel the cause of this effect you're experiencing right now. And because no one taught you to think in systems, you default back to discipline. Come on man, stop being a bitch. Come on, why can't I get up? Why need more motivation? Do it even if you don't want to. Those are the thoughts you start saying to yourself, don't you? But the slip continues because the negative reinforcement loop is already set in motion, like I said. It was never a discipline problem. And this is what I want to get into your fucking head. The reason you bought into the whole idea of discipline in the first place is because you expect it to show up no matter what every single day. You thought the only thing that fluctuates are emotions, and that discipline doesn't, right? Thus producing reliable action, thus producing reliable results, thus guaranteeing success. But guess what? Discipline does fluctuate. It's not consistent. So guess what happens next? After paying the debt of your negative actions, the need for rest gets replaced with the need for the grind. The reward is replaced with suffering, and pride is replaced with shame. And now the grind starts with the attempt to avoid all that suffering and get your shit together. This is where discipline comes back. And again, because the feedback is delayed, you don't experience any reward at the moment, so you grind even harder, making you go even higher, overshooting the set point and restarting the cycle. So here's a summary of what we covered here. When actions, say being disciplined for example, rises, consequences such as the need for rest, reward and pride also rise. As they rise, you lose the reason to act since there is no suffering, causing actions to decline. And obviously, with worse and worse actions, you get worse and worse consequences, and they begin taking a toll on your sanity because the shame is so high. As you get more depressed and shameful, the urge to grind and avoid that shame increases, causing you to take action, and the cycle starts again. Does this look familiar? It's almost identical to the Lotka-Volterra model, which describes predator-prey population. If these two seemingly unrelated fields have a common pattern, it means there is some sort of underpinning universal mechanism that explains why this happens. So if discipline is not the solution, then what is? How can we achieve stability in behavior? So getting rid of an oscillation and fixing it is something called damping. Damping is an influence within or upon an oscillatory system that has the effect of producing or preventing its oscillations. And here I want to present to you the three main methods to dampen oscillations with some examples, and then I will give you the action items for every single solution to apply to your life and actually improve. The first and best one by far is to just remove the feedback delay altogether. It's like that one famous quote, prevention is better than cure. Now this depends on the system you're dealing with. In the shower example from earlier, the best case scenario would be shortening the pipe as much as possible so that we don't get delay in the first place. The second solution is to reduce the correction intensity. So instead of moving the handle by a lot and overshooting your set point, like I showed in the examples, you can move it a little bit, wait for feedback, move it a little bit, wait for feedback, etc. The stronger the correction, the stronger the oscillation will be, because balancing feedback loops, they only aim to correct the deviation from the set point. And when the correction is too strong, the deviation is also strong, causing another strong correction, and so on and so forth. You want to slow it down, even when it comes to getting better. Getting better too fast doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing. The third solution is to improve prediction by getting better, faster and more accurate information about the feedback. Imagine if you had a monitor on the shower next to each handle telling you exactly how much time it will take for the hot water to arrive. You would just wait without any intervention because you have access to accurate information that allows you to properly predict the future. Or maybe you would open the handle 10 seconds before hopping into the shower. That way, when you do hop in, it's instantly warm and you don't need to change anything. This is what you can do by improving predictions. So, for the second and third solutions here, I dedicated the full next few sections to them because I need to explain them in further more nuances before you can apply them. For now, let's move on to the action steps of reducing feedback delay. Step 1. Identify the system you're dealing with. Step 1.1. Define the output. It all starts with the goal. Like we did earlier, I want you to identify the area of life you're most interested in right now, and then define what exactly are you trying to achieve. What's the desired output? Step 1.2. Define the input. So, for this output to occur, ask yourself, what is the necessary, non-negotiable action you need to take? What's the input? And keep it simple. Keep it one action. Step 1.3. Define the stock by asking yourself, what are the positive versus negative consequences that will take place after said actions? So for the negative actions, what are the negative consequences? For the positive action, what are the positive consequences? Step 1.4. Define the feedback or the sensor. The sensor is the part of the system that perceives the output. Simply ask yourself, how will you know if you've got the output or not. What do you use to be able to perceive and analyze this output? This may seem abstract, so I created a lot of examples in the PDF below that you can use to basically have a better grip over this concept and better understanding of systems. Also, make sure you watch the other videos as well to further strengthen your understanding. Step 2. This is the most crucial step of this section. Define the feedback delay. So after identifying the feedback itself, now I want you to ask yourself, how long does it take for that information about the feedback to arrive? How long does it take for you to know the results, and why does it take that long? What causes the delay? Again, this is completely different based on the different systems you're dealing with and based on the goal you're trying to achieve as well. So let's get into more nuances here. Step 3. Identify whether you can remove the feedback delay or not. Unfortunately, with some systems, we cannot change the duration it takes for the feedback to arrive, since it's embedded in natural cause and effect. Examples of this include digestion. So for example, when you eat food, you don't instantly gain the weight. Your body needs to process it, and you can't really remove that process. Another example could be making money from your job, for example. You work today, but you can only receive the money at the end of the month. And you can't really change that policy, you can't change the policy of the company and tell them to pay you today. I want you to take your time with this and try your best to tackle this from every possible perspective, and don't instantly jump to the conclusion that your delay is not adjustable. A small tip I would give you here is that most of the time for natural systems such as physics, biology, chemistry, usually you cannot really reduce the feedback delay. But for artificial systems such as a shower, the delay is adjustable. But again, take this with a grain of salt and think for yourself depending on the system you're dealing with. Step 4. Shorten the delay. So after identifying whether you can influence the delay or not, the next step is simply removing it. This may require you to be slightly creative in your own ways. On the surface, a lot of the time, it will appear that you cannot do anything about it, but there is always a solution. You just need to look for it. Take your time, okay? For example, I study systems where the output is your grades, the input is studying, and the stock or the process is understanding and memorizing. Here, the feedback or the way you know whether you've performed well or not is when you look at your results, when you look at the test grades, when you look at the test results. But this arrives way too late, since it happens only once per quarter or once per semester, meaning that the system has huge delay. As a result, you may be lazy the whole time and then suddenly overcorrect by studying one night before the exam. This causes you to burn out and then be lazy again until you recover, creating an oscillation. Now on the surface, it may seem like you can't really do anything about this delay because you're not the one who decides when these exams actually take place. But one way to shorten this delay is to take exams from the previous years and practice on those. That way you can instantly know your level, you can instantly know what you need to work on, and you don't have to wait until the end of the semester to know whether you've done well or not. So that's just one example that I came up with, and it came off the top of my head. The point here is that you need to be creative here and force your brain to innovate. So again, go ahead and take action on these steps. Part 5. Reduce the correction intensity. I'm not even exaggerating when I say that this is one of the biggest, if not the biggest lesson I've learned over the last few years. So let's get straight into it. From here, a few issues arise. What if you can't really reduce the feedback like I mentioned earlier? Well, then you will not be able to dampen the oscillation. And if you don't dampen the oscillation, the feedback loop will pull you down. And as long as these oscillations exist, you will not improve your life. But even if you can't dampen the oscillation, dampening doesn't necessarily equals improvement, because you only removed the oscillation, but you didn't fix the fact that balancing loops gets activated when you improve, meaning you're back to being average again, which is more painful than falling off. So what do you do in here? Now we're stuck. If you try to improve, you oscillate, and if you try to avoid oscillations, you end up average. Well, lucky for you, I figured this out. Do you remember the idea of homeostasis that I mentioned earlier? This is the set point that your brain is trying to achieve. The balancing loop's job is to correct any deviation from that set point. When you go up, it pulls you down, and when you're going down, it pushes you up. If we try to make the good days better, the loop will always fight back and eventually win. This is extremely dangerous, as I showed you in my story, because the harder you push, the harder the system pushes back. The more you grind, the further you get away from the set point, and the further you climb, the stronger the correction will become. You know, this is exactly why I hate the self-improvement space so much, because they only preach discipline, climbing higher without any accounting for biological limits. So at this point, it almost sounds like you are doomed. If your own biology is constantly pulling you back down, then what the fuck are you supposed to do? It's easy to get mad here and point the finger at biology saying, oh, why do I have to deal with this? Why does my body not understand what I'm trying to do? Why is it fighting me? Why is evolution against me? That's the kind of bullshit I used to say. But guess what, motherfucker? We did not evolve to go to the moon either. We did not evolve to go to Mars. Literally, in every fucking sense of the word, we evolved to live on Earth, not on Mars or a fucking moon, you know? Yet somehow we're making it there. That means there is a workaround. That means consciousness have ways to overcome natural instincts. There is a trick that I'm gonna give you here that you can use to overcome both of these issues, and it's founded in basic arithmetic, which is the idea of subtracting a negative. We all know basic addition and subtraction, but do you remember what happens when you subtract a negative? Imagine a number line that measures money. Now, let's say you're $10 in debt. If I tell you to subtract negative $10 of debt, you don't end up poorer, you end up richer. The natural human intuition we have is that subtractions automatically means less. But notice, I didn't say subtract $10. I said subtract negative $10 of debt. There's a difference. Removing a negative is the same as creating a positive. You removed the disadvantage you were in. You removed the debt itself. Instead of adding something good, you eliminated something bad. And the result of removing a disadvantage, it's still an improvement. You've already heard all these self-improvement gurus talk about less is more, less is more, less is more. But they never explain why that's the case. This is why. If you have a bath of water, you can fill it by increasing the inflow through adding more water, or you can fill it up by reducing the outflow, such as closing the holes, for example, which the water is leading out of. That's exactly how this idea works. Now, let's see how this applies to your life. Notice what the function of the balancing feedback loop is. Its function is not to destroy you, it's just to bring you back to a balanced state called homeostasis, like we said before. And you can take advantage of this feature to make sure that the system fights with you rather than against you. If you pay attention to the graph, both you and the balancing loops actually have a common enemy, the low point. You don't want to be lazy and full of shame, and believe it or not, neither does your body and psychology, because the set point is higher than that. That's why. The only reason you may end up here is due to overcorrection. So if you raise the bad days and make them less bad, the system will actually be on your side, since you're moving closer to the set point instead of further away from it like you do on the good days. That means there is less friction and an easier path to improvement. And remember what the reinforcement loop does. It amplifies change. Here, the amplification rate is still pretty much the same. The only thing that changes is that now you have a new starting point, which means you will automatically overshoot your old peak. When that happens, the set point also rises. Remember, homeostasis is nothing more than the average of 2 points. And when the low points goes up, the high points also go up. That creates a new average, because the average is nothing more than the middle between those two extremes. And just like that, you've now established a new baseline. From there, the correction will happen again and you will fall off again. Unfortunately, there's no way around that. You cannot have a perfect life. However, the good news is that you can repeat this process over and over again. With every drop, you simply raise the low point a little bit higher than the previous drop. And over time, your new low becomes your old high. Let me give you a concrete example of how this works. Let's use sleep as an example, since I find it very easy to explain this concept with. Imagine your worst day is going to bed at 2 a.m. When you hit 2 a.m., you panic and start thinking to yourself, what the fuck am I doing? I've got work tomorrow, I can't keep doing this, I have to go to bed. Now imagine your best day is going to bed at 10 p.m. and you never really seem to fall asleep earlier than that. If we average those 2 points, we find that the set point your brain is trying to achieve is midnight, because it's the middle between these two extremes. If you take a closer look, trying to improve the good day by going to bed at 9 p.m. actually moves you further away from the midnight set point, causing the balancing loop to correct you. But if you instead focus on making the bad days less bad, say you promise yourself to never sleep past 1:30 a.m. for example, you're actually moving closer to the set point, which is exactly what your brain wants. So instead of fighting you, it helps you to achieve that goal. Now, to be honest, there still will be friction, it's still hard, but at least your body is not 100% against you. And because you've raised the low point, the natural overcorrection means that the high point also rises. Maybe now you start going to bed at 19:30 without forcing it, without willpower. It's just a consequence of raising the low point. And now, since both points have changed, the average also changes, creating a new baseline, and you can apply this to any area of your life. Never try to make the good days better, because that will only lead to destruction. If you try to force your way upward, you genuinely risk dying, and I'm not even exaggerating when I say that, because when you go too high, you can trigger an intense overcorrection that can destroy the entire system, which is exactly what I experienced, and I nearly died because of this. So don't take this advice lightly. Even though everyone is screaming in your face, telling you to grind harder and push through the pain or whatever, system theory and your own life experience shows that's not the solution. Even though on the surface it sounds like a good thing, yeah, trying harder is a good thing, but improving too fast or too much can actually cause the system to panic and overcorrect. Now, let's move on to the action exercises. We got quite a lot for this section, so let's begin. Step 1. Identify the negative balancing feedback loops triggers. When you're on a roll, winning and got momentum on a high point, what is it that you say or do which then starts the negative cycle? What is it? What triggers the drop in the first place? Step 2. Identify the negative reinforcement loop. So when small triggers takes place, how does it scale up and multiply itself? How does one loss become 2, then 4, then 8? How do you feed into that loss? How does that rapid amplification happen? Step 3. Apply second order consequences thinking. One very good way to go about doing this is through what's called second order consequences thinking. You see, actions have consequences. We all know this to be true. Cause leads to effect. But here's the real kicker that no one understands. Consequences themselves have consequences. Consequences of consequences have consequences to infinity. These effects are what's called second order consequences. Every individual action you take, no matter how trivial, sets off a chain reaction of effects through time that will dictate how your life ends up. And so I want you to apply this mental model right now by identifying your own chain reaction. When you take action on something, something else will happen. Not only that, but also what is the next thing that will happen after that. Map out every consequence after the original one that you thought was the end. Here are a few examples on screen. Some of these are cycles that I have actually lived and not even hypothetical, so try grounding this in previous experiences you had in the past, so that way you know this to be true and your mind believes it and takes it seriously by remembering the pain you lived in the past. Step 4. Materialize an anti-trigger. When doing these exercises, it's easy to know what the problem is. It's easy to tell yourself, yeah, I will not fall for it in the future. The real challenge comes when that future is around the corner. When that future comes in and you're on a roll, winning, being confident, and suddenly you get that devilish thought. So to avoid memory loss, you need to either print an anti-trigger out or just put it in your phone background or somewhere where you can see it very, very often, so that you're consistently reminded of that shitty fucking thought that caused your downfall, that one fucking excuse, that one fucking cope that leads to another and another. I think printing your second order consequences map is a very good idea. Step 5. Intervene and kill the negative reinforcement loop cycle before it grows too much. So after identifying the trigger and how that triggers amplifies itself, Here, you want to do your best to intervene and prevent this whole bullshit from happening. As that one famous quote again, prevention is better than cure. I want you to have a killer mindset here, killer instinct, quite literally in every single sense of the word. You want to ensure that every single thing that contributes to the drop goes extinct, especially your thoughts. Really, like the best thing you can intervene are your thoughts. It all starts with the thoughts, so learn to observe them and see them from a separate standpoint, see them from a third person view. Never ever allow them to multiply, literally make them go extinct. Step 6. Raise the low point. Unfortunately, you will inevitably fall off, and here it's just all about making sure you don't fall as hard. Like I said, there is no way around that. The important thing is that you don't fall as hard as you did before. In part 1, remember I asked you to identify your low point. You should have done this by now. So here I need you to think of ways you could be less bad in this specific area of life. How can you improve the bad days? One important note here is that you don't want to raise this too much, because when we say a bad day, we're talking about like the lowest point of your life, and during that time it's extremely hard to stay clear-headed and actually follow through the plan. So you need to reduce the friction and difficulty of this improvement as much as possible. As shown in this graph by BJ Fogg, who's a behavior scientist at Stanford, when your motivation is low and the difficulty of the task is high, the action will not happen. It simply will not take place. But if you reduce the difficulty, then you will be able to perform the task even on a shitty day, which in return naturally increases your motivation. And when your motivation goes up, execution scales up non-proportionally, meaning that you can start executing hard tasks even on medium levels of motivation, and vice versa. You cannot execute medium difficulty tasks on a low motivation. It has to be easy. And here, on the low day, you want to confront the monster in the real world. Look at it dead in the eyes. This is the true test. This is the true filter. It's when you're actually in a slump. David Goggins once said this.
So what's the great divide of human beings? Who are you on those days you don't want to do things? It's easy to conquer when it's good weather. You got good sleep. Work's going good. The family's good. You feel great. Your body's not injured. Those are the easy days to conquer. But who are you on those fucking days when all hell's broke loose? Your body's fucked up. You're sore. You're depressed. You're miserable. You're not the favorite person at school. You might be getting bullied. You might be falling behind in life. Who are you on those days when shit's all fucked up? That's the great divide. Those people who get up on those days when everything's fucked up and still grind, that's the separator right there. Stay hard.
And I think I finally just understood what he meant beyond just the motivational feeling I usually get from watching him. On the bad days, when you're feeling like shit, when you don't want to move or do anything and you're contemplating suicide, this is where you stick to the new low point improvement that we mentioned earlier. This is why I told you to make the improvement as small as possible, because no matter how bad the day is, no matter what happens to you, no matter who dies, you must stick to these new standards no matter what. It's the only thing you have. Fight with every ounce of your being to not breach these new small improved standards. Step 7. Identify the positive balancing loops triggers. When you're in a rut, losing and hating yourself, what is it that you usually say or do which then starts the positive cycle? What triggers the climb? A very good idea here I would like to give you is to use negative motivation as a force multiplier. Don't think about your dream. Don't think about your future and your goals. Fuck that pussy shit. That will not actually help you on the bad days. You know what helps you on the bad days? It's a nightmare. It's your biggest fear. The worst possible scenario. Really think to yourself, like, imagine like the piece of shit you're gonna end up if you don't do this small improvement. You're gonna end up what? Like, what do you fear? Do you fear ending up like average? Do you fear ending up a loser? Ending up in a shitty situation? What's your biggest fear? and use that to remind yourself that if you don't do this, this is where you will end up. Step 8. Identify the positive reinforcement loop. When that small trigger takes place, how does it scale and multiply itself? How does one win becomes 2, then 4, then 8? How does that rapid amplification happen? Usually this happens naturally because one thing just leads to another, but you want to become aware of it, Step 9. Identify whether the system you're dealing with can scale infinitely or not. For example, a business can technically scale up infinitely, You can keep on making more and more and more money. The only limits are your skills and knowledge, but technically growth can keep on going up and up and up, The only limit is like being a multi-trillionaire, right? So fame is also another example. You can technically be known by everyone on earth, so the fame system can tolerate high bandwidth of growth. On the other hand, however, if you look at systems such as biology, for example, there are very strong limits. You could not lift an infinite amount of weight. You could not work an infinite amount of hours. Waking up before 4 a.m. is useless and doesn't contribute to growth. So here, I want you to ask yourself, is there a true physical limiter to growth in this system you're dealing with? A quick disclaimer I would say is that if a system can grow infinitely, that doesn't mean it's for free. It doesn't mean it's easy. There's always stress and pressure when it comes to growth. It just means the edges can tolerate larger expansion. Step 10. Pour gas into the fire. If you follow the previous steps properly, here all you have to do is just intervene at the amplification levels and pour as much gas into the fire as much as you fucking can and watch it grow like a wild catastrophe. The reason I asked you in the previous steps to identify whether your system can tolerate large expansion or not is because if it doesn't, then you have to stop at one point, You have to stop at the point where physical limits are the triggers. And you gotta be very careful about that. I think productivity is a perfect example for this. Past a certain point, working more hours is actually more detrimental than rest, because the system needs to recover. So if you just keep trying to grow, you will encounter physical limitation that simply could not be solved. Here, you want to identify that limit, which is what you did in the previous step. And in this step, I want you to stop growing or stop improving right before you hit that limit. And a lot of the time, you need some experience to identify your own limits, And a lot of the time, your limits can be stretched and can be improved. So it's a process. You will identify your own stressors with experience. Part 6. Improve feedback accuracy. The third and final solution to solving oscillations is just as necessary, if not more necessary than the previous two, which is information accuracy about the feedback. Without understanding the underlying rules, you'll keep building false explanation for what's happening. That's because the human brain is naturally optimized to connect cause and effect. It constantly searches for patterns, But when the system is non-linear and you don't understand how it works, you end up linking the wrong cause to the wrong effects. Over time, you construct a completely false map of reality, and having the wrong map is far, far, far more dangerous than having no map at all. When you don't have a map, usually you're cautious, You test your assumptions, you stay open to new evidence and recognize that you might be wrong. But with a false map, you gain confidence without accuracy. This can lead to catastrophic consequences. For example, in the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster, managers believed that the shuttle was safe to launch despite engineers warning about the cold. This overconfidence led to the shuttle explosion, killing all 7 astronauts and wasting billions of dollars and years of efforts. During the Titanic sinking, many people believed the ship was almost unsinkable, so there weren't enough lifeboats, and more than 1,500 people died after it struck an iceberg. In the 2008 global financial crisis, banks and investors believed house prices would continue rising, but when that assumption proved false, it triggered a worldwide financial collapse that caused trillions of dollars in losses. When you're overconfident with inaccurate information, you become convinced that your understanding is correct when it's actually built on faulty assumptions. And the worst part is that when someone points the flaws of your model, you're very likely to dismiss them immediately because of confirmation bias. Every new piece of evidence, it gets filtered through this false map you've already constructed and concluded is true. That's one of the worst fucking position a person can be in, which is being confidently wrong without even realizing it. I spent so much time wrestling with non-linearity, and finally I actually got to a good grips with it. So let's begin. I wanted to discuss this so long, I just didn't have like good enough understanding, but now I do. So in a previous video about complex adaptive systems, I told the story of how adding 14 wolves into an ecosystem caused their rivers to literally bend. No human on earth could have predicted that outcome simply because the cause and effect are not proportional in these kinds of systems, and you are a complex adaptive system yourself. In a simple system such as a shower, the information is relatively clear and easy to access because there aren't many components that contribute to change, but this is not your case at all. You are a complex adaptive system. Complex meaning that you're made of trillions of parts all interacting together. You're non-linear because the cause and effect relationship is unpredictable, meaning that small inputs can lead to large outputs and vice versa. It's inconsistent. And finally, you're also adaptive. You learn and your behavior changes over time. And the same thing goes to your brain. Like when you learn something new and it works, your brain can literally adapt and that good thing stops working, meaning that the system adjusts its behavior over time. When dealing with complexity and non-linearity, having a systemic way to filter all the noise between these countless elements and finding what truly matters and what doesn't becomes non-negotiable. Because if you don't, you will literally go insane trying to make sense of the chaos. One day something works completely fine, the next day it doesn't, and without any clue whatsoever as to why that failure occurred. And this should terrify you because it means effort doesn't guarantee results. You can do everything quote unquote right because you thought it's right and still end up irrelevant or average despite putting in real actual hard work simply because the system is just unpredictable. So let's discuss how to solve this problem. The solution is found in probability and statistics. This field is all about modeling uncertainty with data. One of the most classical examples of why this field is so useful is going from gas molecules to descriptions from thermodynamics. Imagine a given space containing 10 to the power of 15 molecules or something like that, right? That's like a quadrillion molecules or whatever. That's way too much information to measure. You can't measure the velocity and position of every fucking molecule of air individually, and even if you could do that, you wouldn't want to fucking do it. So instead, we have this incredibly elegant and efficient statistical model that describes this astronomically complex physical system using just a few thermodynamic properties. You know, with just a few numbers like temperature, entropy, and so on, you can characterize this insanely complex system and predict its behavior very accurately. That's a great example of how probability can help with modeling all that massive complex uncertainty. One thing I'd like you to keep in mind is that when we talk about randomness or uncertainty, such as flipping a coin for example, it's often not actually fundamentally random. It's still deterministic. Like a coin is governed by force, mass, acceleration, etc. And you could probably model it with a computer and a bunch of equations. But if you put all that aside, as far as you're concerned as a human observer, there is just too much uncertainty, too many variables that you can't possibly compute in your head right now. So to you, a coin flip might as well be random, and it's much more useful to model it with probability instead of trying to build a perfect deterministic model. I'm telling you this because I want you to keep one thing in mind. There is always cause and effect. Always. Even when things seems chaotic or you're completely confused as what's going on, there's still structure underneath. You just need to find it. So let's start with a very simple thought experiment of how nonlinearity works. Imagine a machine with a red button on it. The input in this case is the number of times you press the buttons, and the output is the number of coins that comes out. This machine has two modes, linear and non-linear. In the linear mode, cause and effects are perfectly proportional. When you press the red button once, you receive 1 coin. If you press it twice, you receive 2 coins. 3 times, 3 coins, and so on and so forth. You can easily predict it because if you double the cause, you double the effect. In the non-linear mode, however, it's a little bit different because cause and effect are not proportional. So you can press the button once and get 1 coin. You can press it twice, get nothing. You can press it 3 times and get 7 coins. It's hard to predict because if you double the cause, you maybe quadruple the effect, you may be half the effect, maybe no effects at all. Now, this machine comes with a manual which contains a few set of rules about the non-linear mode which you can use to your advantage. Rule number 1. there is a limit to randomness. When you input a number, let's say pressing the button 20 times, for example, you will get a random number of coins, but within a specific range, not just any possible number. Rule number 2. The average output inside said limits will only reveal itself after a large amount of trials. For example, you select the number 20 as the input and you observe how many coins it produces, not just once, but you repeat that process a large amount of times. Rule number 3. The majority of inputs will give you a small amount of outputs, but there are a few select outliers which when you input, they generate an overwhelmingly big output, bigger than all the other inputs combined, skewing the average, meaning their limit is on the higher side of the spectrum. For example, all the numbers inputted between 1 and 19 may produce less than 10 coins, but if you press the button 20 times, you usually get something between 64 and 78 coins or something. Rule number 4. When you press the button, the output only comes after a while. You must wait. Once you understand these rules, it becomes absurdly obvious as what you need to do if your goal is to make as many coins as possible. You test different inputs, you wait for the outputs before judging whether an input is good or bad, you identify which input consistently produces the highest returns, then you run it repeatedly to find the true average, making it predictable. Once you've established a good enough average, you abuse the living shit out of that input as much as humanly possible. What initially looked like randomness and chaos gradually becomes something you can predict and use to your advantage. These rules will later be the cornerstone for making decisions in your life whenever you're dealing with a non-linear system such as your goals or personal life. Now here's a second thought experiment. Imagine trying to use this non-linear machine without knowing any of these rules. It would be damn near impossible to figure out. You'd drive yourself insane because you'd constantly be assigning the wrong cause to the wrong effect and creating a false model. For example, suppose you don't know about rule number 3, which says that the majority of inputs will give you a small output, but a small set of inputs gives disproportionately large outputs. Imagine you start testing the machine from 1 onwards, pressing the button once giving you 1 coin, pressing it twice gives you 3 times gives you nothing, etc, etc. You keep testing until you reach 16, 17, 18 and 19 inputs and 19 presses, you know. After trying 19 different inputs, everything seems mediocre. You've never seen more than 8 coins. So you confidently conclude that the machine just isn't very rewarding and you stop experimenting because naturally you predicted that 20 will probably produce 4 or 5 coins as well. But what you never discover is that pressing the button 20 times consistently produces something between 64 and 78 coins. The biggest opportunity was only a few steps away, but because every previous result looked ordinary, you assumed the future would as well. If you're thinking linearly, that result seems impossible. Your intuition screams at you, telling you that changing the input by 1 shouldn't multiply the output by 10. But that's exactly what non-linear systems do. They hide massive opportunities behind tiny changes. Do you see how much of a mind fuck this will be? And this is assuming you don't know just one rule. Imagine not knowing all 4 and then going on to construct a model that you're 100% confident is true. You'll be in for some serious trouble, I can tell you that, just like the examples I gave earlier at the start of this section. I myself suffered with this quite a lot. This is why I'm emphasizing on it so much. So let's see how these ideas apply to your life and what you can do about them. Each of these rules actually has a name. I'll tell you what each one is so you can look it up if you want to learn more about it, and I'll also show you how each rule is applied, okay, through the action items. We're gonna start with the third rule. This rule is called the Pareto distribution. This is a probability distribution used to describe situations where a small number of things account for a large proportion of the total. It's named after Vilfredo Pareto, who observed that about 80% of the land in Italy was owned by 20% of the population. If you apply this to the self-improvement system, it will look something like this. When trying to achieve your goal, there is a billion things you can optimize for, and working on the wrong thing or stressing out about the wrong thing will just burn energy without any output in return. Your goal is the final output or the effect. These effects rest on top of 10 crucial select outlier actions which when executed produce a large amount of progress. The first 2 causes or 2 inputs are your knowledge and action. Basically, do you know how to achieve your goal And have you done the necessary actions required? Figuring out the right action and the right knowledge needed also follows the same distributions. There is a billion things you can learn and there is a billion things you can act on, but only if you actually move the needle. If you can't figure the specific actions to your goal, this guide should help you with that. Although the video is extremely cringe now that I look back on it, it still contains some useful information. I plan on remaking it in the future, so tell me if that's something you'd like to see. Taking action and learning are themselves outputs of other more fundamental inputs, which is your physical health. This consists of good sleep, clean diet, exercise, and maybe sunlight/nature. This may sound basic as fuck, but it's important to get this straight because I feel the urge to emphasize that it's nothing more and nothing less than these four. I'm about to go in a small rant here, so buckle up. The health maxing and looks maxing, whatever communities they're called online these days, have got to be some of the dumbest people on planet Earth. Anytime you hear someone talking about red light saunas, cold showers, mouth tape, dopamine detoxes, skincare, sunning your balls, walking barefoot, supplements, carnivore, vegan, keto, and all of this rubbish, dog shit garbage, fucking run for your life. They've already violated the Pareto principle. You only have a limited amount of fucking energy. It's like having a maximum number of buttons you can press on that machine. Would you fucking waste it? Obviously fucking not. Every second you spend optimizing bullshit like the stuff I just mentioned is energy you're taking away from the shit that actually matters and produces real world results. Never ever worry about your physical health beyond these four basic things unless you're trying to become a professional athlete, and even then I would still focus 10 times more on just playing the damn game and actually practicing. I'm saying this because if you know what you need to do, but for some reason you're still not doing it, it's almost always because you fucked up something at the input level. No amount of willpower or gimmicks will dig you out of that. But ironically, physical health is in of itself the output of another input, which is your mental health. If your mind is fucked, you're not going to bed early, you're not going to eat clean or exercise consistently or do any of that shit. Your mental state is what everything else gets built on top of, and it's made of four elements: presence, gratitude, socializing/kindness, and finally beliefs/self-image. I know all of this may sound like basic or repetitive, and honestly it is. I didn't even want to include it in this video because so many people have already given this advice, and my goal with this channel is to talk about what others don't. But this is simply how it works, you know, it's just cause and effect. It's literally impossible to stay depressed or avoid working if you consistently tick these boxes. By the way, if you don't believe in any of this and you're kind of like burnt out by this advice, there will be a link in the description to the scientific mental health program that I took, which taught me all of this. I applied it, and trust me, it works. It's completely for free, so you can take the course yourself and run your own experiments to see if it works or not. And funny enough, once again, these 10 actions also follow a Pareto distributions. Out of all these leverage points, there are two that moves the needle more than the others one, and they are your identity/beliefs and actions. These two are the most powerful things you can ever work on, because if your identity or beliefs are fucked, you won't ever consider this pyramid to begin with, and even if you do, you won't even be able to stick with it. That's why I'm planning on making a full practical video about identity alone. And action is very obvious. If you don't take action, nothing will happen, no matter how good your mental health, physical health, or whatever. The only reason we pay so much attention to health is because without it, execution becomes nearly impossible. The only reason we care about it is so that we can do the action, okay? This pyramid is incredibly useful because if you ever find yourself in a shitty situation, I can guarantee it's because something went wrong somewhere along the input side of things, somewhere along this pyramid. This is the cause and effect chain behind achieving any goal. Whenever you fuck up, look at the pyramid and ask yourself, where did I miss? However, with that said, knowing the cause and effect relationship is still not enough to have accurate information because they present themselves in chaotic non-linear ways, and if you don't apply the other three rules, you will not be able to connect the dots properly. So let's take a look at the other rules. The first one, which states that there is a limit to randomness, is something in probability called the sample space. This is simply a list of all the possible outcomes. For example, when you flip a coin, there are only two possible outcomes, head or tail. You won't don't get a unicorn or an ice cream. That sounds obvious, but it's an important principle. By clearly defining the possible outcomes, you eliminate countless impossible options and a lot of unnecessary noise. And remember what I said earlier, sometimes removing a disadvantage is an advantage in of itself. When you know what can and cannot happen, you're less likely to be caught off guard by events that were always within the realm of possibility. Defining the sample space therefore helps you think more objectively, reducing both unrealistic optimism and useless pessimism. The second rule states that the true likelihood of an event will only reveal itself after a large number of trials. Again, this is a theorem in probability called the law of large numbers. For example, imagine you flip a coin 3 times and get 3 heads in a row. Does that automatically mean the probability of getting head is 100%? No, obviously fucking not. It just means that 3 trials are not enough to show us the true likelihood of getting head. And so if you want to know the real average, you've got to flip the coin a large number of times, like 500 times or something like that, you know. And finally, the fourth rule is just called delayed feedback, which we discussed previously in part 3, so I will not explain it further. Now, let's take a look at the action items and see how can you apply these ideas to your life, and the way we will do this is by running an experiment. Step 1. Define the cause and effect. By now, you should already have done this from the previous exercises in the previous sections, so just take your answers and plug them into the pyramid. Put your goal as the output here at the top, and then place the action required to achieve that goal below it, which is the input. Finally, print out this pyramid. I promise you, it's life-changing. It's insane. You have no idea how powerful this simple tool is. Step 2. Define the sample space. Like I said earlier, this is simply just the list of all the possible outcomes after taking the action. For a sample space to be valid, it must be mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. What does that even mean? Mutually exclusive means that if, after taking action, I tell you that event A happened, it automatically means that no other event also happened. You cannot have 2 different outcomes occurring at the same time. There can only be one. Collectively exhaustive means that together all the possible outcomes cover every single possibility. So no matter what happens, after taking action, one of the outcomes must occur, and you should be able to point to it and say, okay, that's the one that happened. For example, if you flip a coin, you will get either head or tail, but not something else outside these 2 possibilities. So after acting on the causes, you should always be able to point to one and exactly one outcome from your list and say, this is the outcome that occurred. This will help you get rid of all the noise and know what's even possible and what's not. You want to keep this list very simple, minimal, and relevant to what you're actually interested in. Most of the time, it's going to be binary. Did you get the results you wanted or not? You know, it's as simple as that. If you wanted to be more precise and have more like a spectrum, then again, in this video, I explain how to identify the full spectrum. If there is a possible outcome, but it's not relevant, do not include it. Keep it very simple, okay? In the description below, you'll find different examples of self-improvement sample spaces, and I want you to check them out, okay? I'll also link a 5-minute lecture from MIT OpenCourseWare that explains what sample space even is in probability terms, so check it out if you want a deeper understanding of the concept. It's also easy to understand, so it's not that complicated. Step 3. Apply the law of large numbers by observing the results over a long period of time. For a better accuracy, I recommend 30 to 90 days for anything related to human behavior or just personal development in general. Step 4. Track the system's behavior and fucking wait. Seriously, fucking wait, just wait. You now have all the variables of the system, and you know about the oscillations, you know how they happen, you know why they happen, and you've got everything. Here, all you have to do is just wait until you finish the experiment. Once you've chosen a time frame, somewhere between 30 and 90 days to observe how your oscillations happen and your different cause and effects, do not change your plan halfway through. Don't switch strategies, don't add new habits, don't remove old ones. Keep the inputs the same, keep the plan the same, and track your inputs and outputs and test only one variable. For example, if you want to know whether a specific productivity technique works for you or not, use that technique and only that fucking technique and then track it for the entire 30 to 90 days. If you want to know whether meditations improve your mental health or not, then meditate consistently and then track it for 30 fucking days. If you quit on day 13 and you stop tracking and you conclude that meditation doesn't work for me, you've already violated the law of large numbers. You haven't given the system enough time to reveal the true average or the true cause and effect, and instead you're being fooled by randomness and uncertainty. That's the whole point of using probability to solve delayed feedback problems. Wait long enough for the results to reveal themselves. Just one more quick rule I want you to remember. During the experiment, never make important decisions when you are in an extreme emotional state. This is very similar to what the law of large number is. Basically, just don't make decisions inside the 30 days, especially on extremes, okay? You don't want to make it when you are on the peak of hope, and you don't want to make a decision when you are at the bottom of despair. This comes from another idea in probability called regression to the mean. It says that extreme events are very likely to be followed by more typical average ones. So if you are on a losing streak or winning streak and your emotions are all over the place, remember that these extremes often distort your perception of reality. It's still just one data point. It's just one idea. The truth doesn't come from a single outcome. It comes from measuring a large enough set of data and looking where do they converge. You want to develop a harvesting mindset. The actions you take today never produce their full consequences immediately. Most of the time, their real results don't show up until days or even weeks later. So if you're struggling today, always ask yourself, where did I fuck up in this pyramid? A few days or even weeks ago. Today's problem are often the delayed consequences of yesterday's actions, or when I say yesterday's, it's metaphorically. It means like in the past, The same is true in the other direction as well. When you make a good decision today, you usually will not experience its full benefits right away. In fact, you'll probably be suffering the consequences of yesterday's negative action and you'll be confused. Why the fuck? What's going on? Why am I suffering despite doing in good inputs? It's because those rewards take time to appear and the old actions' consequences are appearing today. Think of every good action as like planting a seed. It's the same with a bad action. You're planting a seed, and if you work out today, if you meditate today or eat well today, you're not doing it for an immediate reward. You're planting something that you will harvest a few days or weeks from now, okay? And the sooner you stop expecting instant results and start thinking like a farmer, the easier it will become to connect the dots between cause and effect, okay? Step 5. Arrive at a healthy conclusion. Accurate, true conclusion about the feedback. So after measuring your inputs and outputs for 30 to 90 days, you now have enough large set of data to arrive at a healthy conclusion. Because we're not making decisions based on a single random data point, but the average those data points converge towards, the information is way cleaner, more accurate, and closer to the truth. By doing this, you can map out your oscillations accurately. You can know if they're improving or not. You can know if you're fucking around or not. And the most important thing is that you can link cause to effect properly and know when and how and why you fucked up. One extra tip is that if you applied the techniques from this video and you have a full spectrum, the full like consequences spectrum from 0 to 100, you can also measure your average performance, and you can even measure the standard deviation to have an even more accurate view of the oscillations by making it numerical, which is something I teach in that video. Part 7. Challenges and extra information. By now you should have everything you need and more. In this section I want to tell you like what kind of challenges you will face and some extra information. I want to start by saying that if you made it this far, make sure you go down to the description and check the first link, okay? Watch the video and see if you want to schedule the call with me or not, okay? I'm not gonna tell you what is it. It's gonna blow your mind. Just check her out, okay? And to be honest, I learned so much from making this video. I hope that you've learned a thing or two as well, because this shit has taken me 2 months to fucking make, and it was such a task. Holy fuck. In this section, I want to present the challenges you will face along the way and some extra information I thought were necessary. The first point I want to discuss is short-term versus long-term cycles. This really made me depressed when I discovered it the first time, but I guess it's just another problem to solve. It's nothing special. I found this diagram from economics and it perfectly describes the pattern that I'm talking about. And that's because an economy is in of itself a complex adaptive system just like yourself. So it's natural to find repeating patterns across these fields. Do you remember when I mentioned earlier how when you raise the low point over time your old high becomes your new low? Well, this seems to describe the short-term oscillations only, but these operate within a bigger, larger, long-term oscillation which reveals itself over a year time or so, not 30 days or something. I was talking to my friend about this the other day and he seems to agree with the statement. Ever since I discovered self-improvement, every summer has been dog shit and every winter has been insanely productive. That seems to summarize it right there. That's long-term cycles. If you relate to that, then you better prepare yourself for this long-term bullshit after you fix the short-term cycles, you know. Ironically, I'm making this video while being right about here, you know. I only discovered this recently, so you know, that's why I don't really have a solution yet. The good news is that the long-term oscillation seems to have a similar solution for the short-term one, so far from my experience. Like, you know how the solution is basically, as long as you don't fall off as hard as your old fall, then you should be able to go up over time. Just raise the low point. That seems to be the solution, to be honest, because I didn't fall as hard as I used to. The second point I want to make here is that you and your brain are adaptive systems. Meaning, when you find an idea that clicks with you, it works and solves the problem you're facing, a lot of the time, your brain or the destructive side of you will just adapt to that solution and come up with a new bullshit, like a new excuse or like a new problem and like just new bullshit, you know, that will come out of nowhere. That's because it's an adaptive system and it doesn't want to spend energy on trying to get better, you know, it just wants to maintain homeostasis. So to fix this, I think you just have to do the same shit it's doing. You need to be consistently adapting whenever you face a new problem. You do that by following the scientific method and being constantly innovative, being humble. Be very humble. Like, this video is not the final answer or the quote-unquote secret. There's no secret here, bro. You haven't figured it out yet. You haven't figured shit out. So be humble and be very careful. And by the way, I plan on making a video on the scientific method, so stay tuned for that. The third point I want to make is a strong emphasis on identity. Like, honestly, I don't think you understand the immense power this thing holds. I swear to God, when you update your identity, it's like you instantly raise the set point to a new level without any suffering whatsoever. You gotta look more into this topic. Maybe try reading the book Psycho-Cybernetics. I heard it's pretty good. If you want to, like, you know, work on your identity or whatever, but I personally never read it, so I can't say for sure. Again, a video about identity is probably coming soon. So first link, again, one last time, check it out, like the video, subscribe, all that bullshit. Only if you think the video was helpful. If you think the video was bullshit, then fair enough, right? But if it helped you, if you learned something new, then, you know, give it a shot. Go ahead and get a free call with me and we'll see where we can go from there. Take care.